In November 1981, Keith Potter, along with his diving group, embarked on an ambitious dive into one of England's most famous underground cave systems, the Wookey Hole cave. Their plan was straightforward, to push their limits by venturing as deep as possible and exploring previously uncharted and undiscovered sections of the cave. However, driven by ambition, Keith made a critical and unforgivable mistake that led to his horrifying and tragic death. So, what exactly happened that day in the Wookey Hole cave? Why is this system so renowned? What error did Keith make? And most importantly, what was his ultimate fate? This is the story of the tragic loss of Keith Potter in the Wookey Hole cave. Wookey Hole Cave. Wookey Hole is a small village located in the spectacular Mendip Hills, just outside the historic city of Wells in Somerset, England. With a population of just 450 people, this serene village seems like an ideal landscape from the hustle and bustle of modern life. But there's more to Wookey Hill than just being a remote Victorian village. The village is home to a series of limestone caves at its southern end, known as the Wookey Hole Caves. Adding to their intrigue is the River Axe, which flows directly through the caves, submerging some of the cave's pathways entirely underwater. The cave system consists of a dry gallery that connects 3 large chambers. Various high-level passages branch out from these chambers, with 2 small exits located above the main entrance used by tourists. The water flows into the cave system through the 3rd chamber and continues through the 1st chamber. From there, it passes through 2 sumps, 40 meters and 30 meters long, before finally emerging into the open air. The 4th and 5th chambers of the cave are accessible only through cave diving. Beyond the 5th chamber, there are intricate pathways, some dry and others completely submerged in water. These pathways lead to additional sumps and chambers, extending the total passage length of the cave to an astonishing 2,690 feet, with a maximum depth of 300 meters. Because of its serene, tranquil environment, beautiful location, and the geological and historical significance of the cave, Wookey Hole Village attracts numerous tourists, especially during the summer. Among these visitors was Keith Potter. Keith Potter in the Wookey Hole. At 22 years old, Keith Potter was no ordinary cave explorer. He was young, intelligent, and a medical student at Exeter College, Oxford. However, medicine wasn't his only passion. Keith had always been deeply interested in exploration and cave diving. This passion led him to join the Oxford University Cave Club, OUCC, which participated in numerous explorations across the UK. Keith's contributions to caving, particularly within the OUCC, were remarkable. During the 1980 expedition to Poça del Chitu, he took part in numerous pushing trips, providing invaluable assistance to his companions and demonstrating determination to press on where others were ready to turn back. Notably, in 1981, Keith distinguished himself during a grueling 35-hour pushing trip into severe passages, during which he sustained a knee injury and suffered painful friction sores in his groin. Despite these hardships, Keith became the first to reach G2's terminal sump. Exhausted, injured, and drenched, he displayed his unwavering resolve by spending hours searching for a bypass. Many of his companions credited Keith with enabling the OUCC to successfully reach the bottom of the G2 cave, a feat that might have taken much longer without his efforts. Keith was known for avoiding unnecessary risks, both for himself and his team. Despite his youth, he firmly believed in thorough planning and adhering to the plan. Like every other explorer in the UK, Keith was fascinated by the complex pathways of Wookey Hole Cave. He was determined to be one of the first divers of the modern era to reach the cave's maximum depth. But before delving into the events of the 1981 dive, a bit of background is in order. Background. The first divers to venture into Wookey Hole on July 4, 1935 were Graham Balcom and Penelope Powell. Using relatively basic diving equipment, the duo had to crawl on their hands and knees along the cave floor in near-zero visibility, dragging their breathing hoses and lifelines behind them as clouds of unsettled silt enveloped them. With the goal of exploring the cave as far as possible, the divers set up a base in the 3rd chamber and eventually made their way beyond the previously discovered 4th chamber to reach the 5th, 6th, and 7th chambers. Unfortunately, Due to the weight of their equipment, they were unable to progress any further and were forced to stop at the 7th chamber. Over the years, many divers attempted to push the boundaries of the cave's exploration even further. One such diver was Keith Potter. The journey begins. On November 14, 1981, Keith Potter and his fellow OUCC members arrived at Wookey Hole with the goal of discovering and exploring previously unknown parts of the cave. Since the cave is located on the far side of the village, the team parked their vehicles and began their trek, a short 10-minute walk through the village. Upon reaching the cave, the team started preparing for the dive. Within minutes, equipped with helmets and the rest of their gear, Keith and the OUCC team commenced their exploration of the cave. The entrance to Wookey Hole is situated on the right side of the valley, at the end of a gorge carved into the limestone by the river OUCC. As the team entered this natural wonder through Chamber 1, they were immediately captivated by the sight of the river OUCC gracefully flowing through the cave. Awed by the cave's beauty, the team eagerly began their journey, progressing swiftly through the 1st and 2nd chambers. It's important to note that at the time, Wookey Hole was accessible to tourists only up to the 3rd chamber. Beyond this point, the cave lacked proper lighting and maps, and only skilled and experienced cave explorers were allowed to venture further. As planned, the team swiftly crossed the 1st and 2nd chambers without any issues. Upon reaching the 3rd chamber, they followed the long-standing tradition of previous explorers by setting up camp there to rest. Chamber 3, also known as the parlor among the diving community, is famous for its immense size and its striking solution dome. This natural feature was formed as the limestone gradually dissolved into the groundwater during a time when water levels in the cave were much higher. After setting up camp and taking a short break, the team began preparing their diving equipment and carefully reviewed their plan to ensure everyone was fully aware of each step. The primary objective of the exploration was to reach the deepest sections of the cave, located in Chamber 25. Alongside pushing as far as possible, the team aimed to map previously undiscovered sections of the cave to benefit future divers. However, unbeknownst to the rest of the team, Keith had additional plans of his own. With their equipment secured and everything in place, the team resumed their journey from the 3rd chamber. From this point onward, the dive's level of difficulty escalated significantly. The first 3 chambers of Wookey Hole were relatively wide. The paths were well lit and properly mapped. However, beyond the 3rd chamber, the cave changed dramatically. The passages became much narrower, darker, and increasingly complex. With a total passage length in this area of about 820 meters, 2,690 feet, it was clear that the challenging portion of the journey had only just begun. The team carefully navigated the twisting tunnels, making their way through the narrow and winding passages of chambers 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Each step demanded precision and teamwork, as the environment became more confined and disorienting. Eventually, they arrived at Chamber 9, famously known as the Cathedral. Keith's hidden plan. A well-known rumor circulated among cave divers that deep within the Wookey Hole lay a hidden underground river, unseen by human eyes, but if one ventured far enough into the cave's depths, they might hear the sound of water splashing against the cave walls. Keith, an ambitious and curious young explorer, had always been captivated by such mysteries. Before embarking on this trip with the OUCC team, he'd already begun studying the geological formation of Wookey Hole in detail, hoping to pinpoint where this elusive river might be located. Although Keith hadn't shared this with his teammates, he had a secret plan. He intended to dive far deeper than the others, pushing beyond their planned exploration, in a search of this hidden underground river. If successful, such a discovery would mark a groundbreaking achievement in cave exploration, and Keith wanted to be the one to make it. The Unfateful Dive. After navigating numerous intricate channels and pathways, the entire group eventually arrived at Chamber 9, the Cathedral. Keith, who had reached the chamber slightly ahead of the rest of the team, took a moment to rest and prepare. Acting on his hidden agenda, he quickly geared up, and without informing his teammates, jumped into the water to attempt the sump dive connecting the 9th and 19th chambers, a daunting 200-foot route. The sump offered 2 routes, a lower, deeper passage and a shallower one. Keith chose the more challenging lower route, determined to push further toward his goal of uncovering the rumored underground river. Shortly afterward, Martin Farr, another member of his team, followed. Keith had already reached this point on 2 previous dives, so he aimed to cross the sump as quickly as possible. With this intention, he threw caution to the wind and vigorously pumped his legs through the passage. With every passing second, his movements became faster and more forceful. However, the intense exertion made him increasingly lightheaded and caused his heart rate to skyrocket. Suddenly, his body began to fail, as if warning alarms were sounding. His vision diminished to almost zero, and the once familiar path plunged into complete darkness. Swimming uphill through the elbow of the sump, 70 feet below the surface, the surrounding water grew colder, and the powerful current made further progress incredibly difficult. With his body shutting down, Keith's lungs began to give out, making it harder to breathe and sustain the intense pressure. At this critical moment, he had to decide whether to heed his body's warnings and turn back to seek help from his teammates in Chamber 9 or give his body one final push to cross the sump. Tragically, Keith chose to press on. He believed he'd covered most of the route and thought it would be easier to push through the airspace in Chamber 19, rest, and then continue his exploration for the underground river. However, he was wrong. Within minutes, his lungs were completely depleted of air, and his body finally gave out. Keith suffocated in the cold, unforgiving depths, his ambition leading to his tragic death. The body is discovered. Keith was being followed by a fellow diver, Martin Farr, who at the time was regarded as one of the best divers in the UK. Farr, carefully navigating his way through the sump, was completely unaware of the horrific incident that had unfolded with Keith. In fact, he believed that by now Keith had likely reached Chamber 19 or perhaps even progressed further. However, when Farr finally emerged at the end of the sump, a horrifying reality awaited him. At first, he couldn't believe his eyes, but as he moved closer, he saw Keith lying completely motionless in 10 feet of water. His air tank's mouthpiece dislodged from his mouth. Farr immediately sprang into action, rushing to retrieve Keith. Soon after, other divers reached the scene and joined the rescue effort. For nearly an hour, the group desperately attempted artificial respiration, clinging to hope. Tragically, it was too late, and Keith had already succumbed to the treacherous pathways of the Wookey Hole cave. The aftermath. Filled with panic and disbelief at what had just happened to their friend and fellow diver, the group rushed out of the cave system, finally exiting the left side of the valley near the spring of the River Axe, below a steep limestone cliff face. Once they reached their vehicles, the OUCC members immediately called for help. After some time, rescue teams arrived to recover Keith Potter's body. Keith's funeral took place in Wedmore, just 5 miles from where he had tragically died. In honor of their friend, the OUCC members and fellow college mates decided to place a memorial at the bottom of G2's steep entrance climb, where it would be visible to future cavers. The plaque, crafted from stainless steel, bore the following inscription: 1,139 meters. Keith Potter, who died diving in Wookey Hole, 14/11/81, the first man to bottom this cave. What actually happened? After the body was discovered, a quick and brief examination by the coroner confirmed that, as suspected, the cause of death was drowning. However, the lingering question remained: how did this happen? Keith was no amateur tourist diver. Over the last couple of years, he had successfully completed numerous dives in Spain, the UK, and other parts of the world. In fact, this wasn't even his first dive into Wookey Hole. He had visited the cave multiple times before, and on 2 occasions, he had participated in dives up to Chamber 9. So what went wrong this time? When Farr discovered Keith's body, he made an important observation. Keith's mouthpiece was not where it should have been, but instead was floating far away from the body. This discovery led to a possible theory. It seemed that, in the midst of struggling to continue, Keith's heart rate had escalated. As his exertion increased, dizziness set in, causing disorientation. In the chaos of this struggle, he may have lost his mouthpiece in the water. With his vision deteriorating to near zero and the pressure mounting, it became increasingly difficult for him to locate the essential equipment. Unable to breathe properly, this ultimately led to his tragic death. Who was responsible? In diving incidents, it can often be challenging to pinpoint a single cause, but in Keith's case, several factors likely contributed to the tragic outcome. While there's no doubt that Keith was talented, well-trained and experienced, and properly equipped, all essential qualities for a successful dive, his decisions on November 14th ultimately led to the fatal outcome. The first critical mistake was Keith's decision to plan an exploration that no one else in the group knew about. As one of the most experienced and trusted members of the OUCC, Keith's teammates depended on him. Yet, despite this, he chose to undertake a dive without informing any members of his team. This left no room for support or backup in case something went wrong. And in the treacherous environment of the Wookey Hole, that lack of preparation would prove to be a fatal oversight. Secondly, the dive he chose to attempt had never been tried before. Up until that point, no diver had attempted to locate the rumored underground river, which was said to lie beneath the passageways and chambers of Wookey Hole. This meant that Keith would need to dive much deeper and further than he'd ever gone before. However, both Keith and his team were unprepared for such an ambitious venture. They lacked the specialized equipment and support necessary to make such a risky dive, increasing the chances of failure when faced with extreme conditions. Lastly, and most importantly, Keith's desire to finish the dive quickly so he could embark on his own exploration led to him rushing through the dive. He completed the dives at a much faster pace than is typical, with insufficient rest in between. Even at Chamber 9, where most of his teammates were taking a break to catch their breath, Keith hurried into the water to reach Chamber 19. This decision led to fatigue, which in turn caused his breathing rate to escalate. As a result, he became disoriented and lost his mouthpiece, worsening the situation. The Wookey Hole incident serves as a powerful reminder that despite the cave's popularity as a tourist destination with well-lit pathways and many attractions at the surface, the dangers of diving deep into the cave system cannot be underestimated. Even for an experienced and well-trained diver like Keith, overconfidence and a failure to recognize one's limitations can have dire consequences. Today, the Wookey Hole caves continue to attract tourists and divers alike. However, Keith Potter will always be remembered as the first person to successfully reach the bottom of the cave, a testament to his pioneering spirit, but also a cautionary tale of the risks involved in cave exploration.